Today in chapel we talked about the reality that the greatest expression of the love of God, the wrath of God, and the glory of God is the cross, and how that affects, changes, impacts what the church is supposed to do. So the church itself is a representation or an expression of the glory of God. If we live differently than that, we begin to live out of vicarious holiness. The vicarious holiness is actually not a real holiness. From 2 Corinthians, we looked at the fact that there was a young church that was hoping to be or act holy because they would follow Paul, Apollos, or Cephas, or even some were saying Christ. But it was a pseudo-holiness. It was a vicarious holiness. There was no reality of holiness in their life. The Bible says that the gospel is the power of God. We talked about how we apply that into our life in a real way, in an authentic way, to truly live out what the church is supposed to be.
Today in chapel, we learned from Pastor Brad Summers from PAX North about learning to love the gospel of God and the glory of God above having a superficial relationship with God through preachers we idolize or teachers we idolize, and that we would truly fall in love with God.
This morning we got to listen to Reverend Brad Summers and his message on holiness. One thing I particularly liked was his reference to the verse in 1 Corinthians where Paul is talking to the church in Corinth. And what that means today to our church is we don't rely on God's holiness. We rely too much on our own holiness. We forget all that He has done for us, His great show of mercy and love at the cross,